Finally, after managing to eliminate the Wild Hunt by yeeting Rerir through the Moon Gate, Nordkrai's heroes have earned themselves an opportunity to celebrate the Moon Prayer Night, and what a festival it was. The cute Moon Goddess has finally obtained a new name, she got a chance to enjoy the hustle and bustle of Nasha Town thanks to Lauma, she made new friends and reunited with old ones, finally got to open up and show her true self, got to enjoy lots of fun games and delicious snacks, became a Pokemon trainer? Huh? And she's even sharing candy with her friends. The future is truly looking bright for Columbina.
Oh. Miss Barbalat? What is it?
This card is death.
That doesn't sound very good.
Oh, nah, ignore that. It's just a silly card game. Who takes divination seriously these days anyway? Once Columbina Hyposelenia has had her fill of the festive atmosphere, she is directly escorted by the Traveler, Lauma, and Arlecchino to the Phantom Ruins of Hyperborea so that they can leverage the mechanism created by the Ancients to send Columbina to the Frost Moon where she wishes to go. At last, the goddess of the Frost Moon, rejected by Teyvat as she is, can now return to her lunar abode on this beautiful moonlit night, with the celebratory atmosphere masking the slight sorrow of farewell.
The moon really is closer than ever tonight.
True, it really is. Wait, what?
Reason, life, death, time, and space. They all believed I would fail.
What? Huh? Zandik? Holy shit! What? What the hell? What? The boys are jumping him! Never mind, they're not! What? Hold up! Okay, hold on, the Traveler is cooking. What is going on? No! Columbina! No! Columbina's reunion with Rerir is certainly going to be an awkward one. So, at the conclusion of the Archon quest, melting moonlight in the morning mist, just as everyone thought their journey in Nordkrai had come to a close, the Doctor, Zandik, managed to pull off one of the biggest plot twists in Genshin's history by arresting Columbina and seizing the power of the Three Moons for himself. Now, I'm going to be honest here, the conversation that the Traveler's party has at the end of the Archon quest does not do a very stellar job at conveying exactly how Il Dottore was able to pull off this accomplishment. Alice and Nicole discuss how he was pulling the strings from the shadows this whole time, creating quote-unquote variables that he used to change the history of the Hyperboreans. However, these concepts on their own are relatively vague, making them easy to not understand or even misunderstand. Thus, instead of just making a boring video where I simply tell you that Zandik seeks to usurp Teyvat's primordial authorities and turn himself into the equivalent of a descender, I will start by first showing you just how absurdly calculated and precise every move he has made up to this point truly is, once you put everything into proper context. Zandik planned his objective so well and for so long that I didn't know where to begin my explanation due to the numerous intricate aspects involved. So, after mulling it over for a few days, I found the perfect starting point. Take a look. Of course, Zandik used the authority of the Three Moons to slow down time tremendously within a massive vicinity that affected everyone around except himself, the Traveler, and Columbina. Dottore can do this because during their days within the Fatui, he used Columbina to conduct extensive experiments on Kuvaki, slowly building for himself an advanced understanding of moon power and its properties. Back then, Columbina knew very little of Zandik's true intentions, and she obliged regardless, viewing it as payment for the Fatui allowing her to stay with them. Because of this, Zandik learned how a moon goddess controls Kuvaki and applied those same principles to control the Moon Marrow himself. Thus, it makes sense that Zandik and Columbina remained largely unaffected by the Moon Marrow's influence on the environment, but what about the Traveler? How can they bypass it? Well, after their confrontation with Zandik, the Traveler suspects that their ability to circumvent the Moon Marrows time freeze is due to their status as a Descender. And if you notice, Zandik, for his part, was not too surprised by what he saw, as this was likely within his expectations. Remember that the Fatui know what the Descenders are. After all, when Boer told the Traveler about the Descenders for the first time, she had learned of them from none other than Zandik. René de Petrichor describes these Descenders as alien beings with wills that rival an entire world, and as ones who can defy the fate that constrains all. If you have been paying attention to his story so far, then you're probably aware that Zandik is not a fan of fate. In fact, surpassing it has been one of his primary objectives for hundreds of years, hence why I briefly mentioned earlier that he likely seeks to turn himself into the equivalent of a Descender using the Moon Marrows. But to understand how Descenders can bypass fate, it is crucial to first understand what Fate on Teyvat actually is. And it all starts with Irminsul. As the heart of the ley lines, the World Tree Irminsul has the ability to control both the history and destiny of all creatures and environments within its reach. This is a topic that I have discussed countless times on this channel, using various examples such as Through the Mists with Rue, Inversion of Genesis with Scaramouche, as well as Bedtime Story with Caribert. A while ago, I even made a whole video dedicated to deciphering the functions of Teyvat's system of fate, which has aged surprisingly very well, all things considered. However, I am not about to make you watch a 40-minute video just to understand this one. So, to summarize my conclusion from there, think of Irminsul as a database that contains all information about Teyvat and its inhabitants. With access to an immense archive of memories encompassing all things, Irminsul can utilize this data to create a type of predictive causality system where it converts memories into knowledge and knowledge into variables used to calculate chains of cause and effect. Through this process, it evaluates possible outcomes and selects the most likely path the world should follow. In this sense, the World Tree and its ley lines function in a manner comparable to the matrix of prescience ultima employed by Master Diviner Fu Xuan on the Xianzhou Luofu, a system that relies on historical data and logical chains to forecast the most probable future. Irminsul can execute this process on a macroscopic scale by influencing entire ecosystems, or on an individual level where it evaluates variables such as someone's environment and behavior, cross-referenced with historical precedent to calculate and select for the most likely trajectory of that person's future. And because these calculations are so absurdly precise, it simulates the illusion of fate. That being said, when it comes to the Traveler, one of their defining traits as a Descender is the fact that they are not recognized by the ley lines. When Mona first tried to divine the Traveler's future using hydromancy, she failed to see anything about them. This is because hydromancy is a technique that utilizes the reflection of the starry sky on the water to decipher fate, where the false sky is itself a reflection of the ley lines according to Layla. Thus, since fate is nothing more than Irminsul's causal predictions, it makes sense that the World Tree cannot calculate anything for the Traveler due to lacking any meaningful information to evaluate. This is precisely why Morax sent them to save Hu Tao from the underworld. As Liwe's ley lines began absorbing her memories and information to send her soul to the realm of the dead, the Traveler took her place within the array and pulled her out without being absorbed themselves, because Irminsul does not acknowledge their existence to begin with. It has no information about them, no variables to calculate, and no perceivable cause to account for. And without a cause, there is no effect. A very valuable feature for a heretic who seeks to defy destiny itself. While discussing how Zandik managed to outmaneuver them, Alice and Nicole realized that he must have changed the causality of history by altering the memories of the Hyperboreans to create a future possibility where the power of the three moons would end up in his hands. The problem, though, is that Zandik didn't go back in time to talk with the Hyperboreans. In fact, the Hyperboreans never even met him at all, which makes it even more baffling how he was able to deceive them with such precision and accuracy. Turns out, Zandik has been plotting for this moment for a very long time, and it all has to do with the long series of experiments he conducted through Scaramouche. During the Sumeru Archon quest, Al-Haytham explains that the reason Azar was constantly ahead of Cyno by multiple steps, regardless of what he did, was due to the Grand Sage employing the Akasha system to calculate and predict all of Cyno's actions based on the knowledge it had of Sumeru's people. Al-Haytham further adds that the Academia kept a thick notebook next to the Akasha control panel which contained everything one would need to know about the General Mahamatra, his behavior, preferences, and even the routes he would take. The sages fed this knowledge to the Akasha system in the form of data, which then used it to compute and predict all of Cyno's movements with almost perfect accuracy. So, to circumvent it, Cyno had to act completely differently from what he normally would. Keep in mind that at the time, Azar and the Academia sages were collaborating with Zandik and the Fatui to create a new god out of Kunikuzushi. Thus, what I am about to explain to you right now is going to be from Zandik's perspective so that you can understand how the developers designed his character to think. The Akasha's algorithm was created by Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, who herself was the avatar of Irminsul. Therefore, it's perfectly in line for her to have based the Akasha's functions on that of the World Tree. Irminsul's advantage over the Akasha is that it has access to near absolute knowledge and memories, because unlike the Akasha, which needs to be fed knowledge to formulate its predictions, Irminsul is perpetually supplied with information through the ley lines that cover almost all of Teyvat, giving it complete knowledge of not just history but also the constant present, allowing it to adapt and adjust the entire world to its system. But when it comes to a descender like the Traveler, they are an outside variable that remains unaccounted for by Irminsul. So, when they interfere with the trajectory of its future predictions, the World Tree fails to adjust its evaluations for the changes they made because it lacks any variables surrounding them, giving the Traveler the appearance of defying fate. By the way, this same logic would also apply to extremely powerful abyssal entities, not just descenders. Speaking of defying fate, after failing to retain the electronosis in his divine body, which, keep in mind, was also part of Zandik's overarching experiment, Scaramouche became dejected, ultimately deciding to delete his miserable existence from Irminsul by erasing all memories of himself in hopes of rectifying his former crimes. Scaramouche could do this because Beelzebul made him out of a white branch from the World Tree itself, which almost makes him Nahida's younger brother from another mother. Nonetheless, despite deleting all his memories from Teyvat, Kunikuzushi could not actually eradicate his own existence. Every choice he made and everything he did still happened. The only difference is that the world forgot who did them. The bladesmiths of the Raiden Gokaden were still assassinated, and 3 out of their 5 schools were still destroyed. The Sumeru Academia and Zandik still constructed the Shuki no Kami, and most importantly, the Fatui still kept their 6th seat empty, which I suspect was done intentionally. You see, Zandik was one of the earliest harbingers to be recruited by Piero and the Tsaritsa into the Fatui shortly after their founding approximately 500 years ago. Furthermore, it was Zandik who secretly murdered Niwa Hisahide on Tataratsuna 400 years ago, leading Kabukimono to spiral down the path of becoming Kunikuzushi until he ended as the Fatui harbinger Scaramouche. We already know that Irminsul's memory alteration can be circumvented by converting records into fairy tales or poems. The angel Nicole outright says this to Lauma, and it is very likely that Piero and the Tsaritsa are aware of this as well, hence why they choose to nickname their harbingers after characters from the Commedia dell'arte, a type of Italian theater, to give them a preservable fictionalized role. If it is the case that Zandik is one of the very few people who can still remember Scaramouche, then the latter's act of deleting his history from Irminsul must have proved to Zandik that memories can be deleted from the ley lines by someone other than the almighty heavenly principles. And since memories can be deleted, then that implies they can be retroactively added as well, which is precisely what he did with the ancient people of Hyperborea. A method to change how people perceive history without changing the actual events. When the Traveler and Al-Haytham went to rescue Kusanali from the Academia, Al-Haytham replaced the knowledge capsule on Azar's desk with another one that contained false information about the Dendro Archon escaping. And once that capsule's data was fed into the Akasha, it led everyone into believing that Kusanali had truly broken free from her confinement. Assuming Ruka Devata did indeed base the Akasha's predictive framework on Irminsul, then just as memories can be erased from Irminsul to make the world forget an event, it should also be possible to introduce false memories into the ley lines akin to how Al-Haytham manipulated the Akasha. As they were making their way through the ruins of Hyperborea, Lauma, the Traveler, and Peruer heard a bunch of phantoms mentioning a savior who appeared to them and told them to forge their own destiny rather than relying on the gods. However, Nicole could not recognize who the man they were talking about was, which is peculiar on its own, since a being as old and wise as her would have definitely remembered a heroic savior figure. Which brings me back to the Traveler's first encounter with Zandik at the Sumeru Academia. The latter implanted a false memory into the Akasha terminal, causing it to imprint the idea of the Traveler as a great hero who came to save the world into the subconscious of the people in the vicinity. Boer used her authority to override their mental faculties, which is how Zandik was able to make her out as the god of wisdom. More importantly though, once he saw that the people of Sumeru truly believed the Traveler was their heroic savior, Zandik smiled and said the following.
My experiment is a success, and now it seems they can no longer hold back their sheer adoration.
Back then, we only knew that Zandik did this to locate the Dendro Archon, but as it turns out, his alteration of the Akasha to make people believe that the Traveler is their savior was part of another experiment which he was conducting simultaneously. Hence why he smirked while stating that his experiment was a success. Looking back at it 3 years later in Nodkrai, this was incredible foreshadowing by the developers, because we now know exactly what that experiment was about. When Nibilang returned from the Abyss and discovered the Moon Sisters' disloyalty, he imprisoned the 3 goddesses and weaponized the moons in his war against Celestia's demon gods. After coming out victorious, the almighty heavenly principles retaliated by destroying 2 of the moons and throwing the last one beyond Teyvat's firmament, leaving the people of Hyperborea without the 3 moon goddesses they worshipped. And in their blind devotion, they became a perfect prey for someone like Dottore. Just like how he convinced the people of Sumeru that the Traveler was their savior by implanting a false memory into the Akasha, Zandik manufactured a series of complex variables surrounding himself, which he converted into knowledge, implanting it in the ley lines and directing it towards the ancient people of Hyperborea. Zandik proceeded to deceive them by tampering with their memories in such a way that they would fully believe he was their savior, promising to create for them a new moon in the sky so long as they did as he instructed. Wanderer and Nicole realized that these variables Zandik implanted into the memories of the Hyperboreans through the ley lines were significant enough to alter Irminsul's calculations of the future, such that it ended up creating a false moon above the teleportation mechanism built by the ancients to communicate with their 3 goddesses. And because the mechanism uses Kuvaki to detect its target, as long as Dottore's false moon resembled a moon more than the corpse of the frost moon beyond the false sky, then it would teleport Columbina and the Moon Marrows right into his grasp. Finally, the last thing he needed to do was distract the Hexen Circle by causing disturbances at Teyvat's borders, leading Alice to believe that the appearance of the phantoms in Nodekrai was connected to the Abyss rather than something else, and in the end he was successful. A very complicated plan from a foolish doctor who was cast away from his homeland as a heretic. Yet, this same man now stands as one who fooled the very fate that dictates all in the world, achieving the power to transcend destiny itself. Before departing from the Light Realm in search of an answer for the all-consuming darkness foretold to him by the Voyager Sutervoinen, Nibelung bestowed upon the Heavenly Moons authority over the natural cycles, with which they came to govern the world in his stead. Naturally, the authority of the Heavenly Moons must have thus been equal to that of a Descender, but the three sisters split that power amongst each other, vowing to never allow it to be united in a single body. This explains why the Moon Sisters exchanged places in driving the silver carriage across the night sky, a consistent account about them which can be found in many renditions of their story from all over Teyvat. And it is very likely that Zandik seeks to break this rule and consolidate the authority of Arya, Sonnet, and Canon into a single deity, himself. This is not a new idea whatsoever. In fact, I made a video discussing how the Academia's Shukinokami was simply a prototype Zandik made for a much more powerful god all the way back in 2023. To give you an idea of how long ago that is, the dinosaurs were still around back then. And just before Natlan, I made another video about Zandik highlighting how the Doctor, a visionless human navigating a conflict of demon gods, dragons, and abyssal monstrosities, might end up rising to become one of the most powerful characters in the story against all odds. Years later, in Nodekrai, I am happy to say that Zandik did not disappoint. The so-called god known as the Everlasting Lord of Arcane Wisdom, whom he manufactured out of Scaramouche, was indeed nothing more than an experimental prototype. After all, Zandik outright admitted this to Boer when he told her that he did not wish to interfere with the results of the experiment in response to her inquiry about why he did not help his fellow Harbinger. The experiment in question was designed to test the potency of an artificial god made using the heart of another deceased one, where the heart in this case was the Electronosis, an artifact created by the first Descender out of the corpse of the third Descender, and is called the Heart of God in Genshin's original Chinese text. In comparison, the Moon Marrows are residual cores of the Moon Goddesses, their quote-unquote hearts. So, by uniting their power, Zandik will ascend to become a supreme deity, one that equals a Descender in might, a will that can protect the world, sustain the world, destroy the world, and create the world. With the power of the three moons, Zandik will not only transcend fate and destiny, he will gain the authority to write and weave them. In Volume 2 of the Byakuyakoku collection, Before Sun and Moon, one of the chronological section headings reads When Doves Held Branches, a title that clearly references the biblical story of Noah's Ark, where Teyvat means ark in Hebrew. In the context of Teyvat, the branches are Irminsul's branches and the doves are the moon goddesses, since Columbina, who is one of them, is heavily associated with doves. Her name literally means little dove in Italian, which is very cute. A few weeks ago, I made a video highlighting how moon power, Kuvaki, is based on electromagnetic radiation, which is light, and speculated that moonlight was used by Nibelung's daughters to relay commands into Irminsul and its leyline system. If you want the full explanation behind the scientific mechanisms of how that works, feel free to watch that video, the link will be in the description. All in all, the point is that Zandik is going to become one of the strongest characters in the story, and ironically, he might not be acting out of line in all of this, as some have assumed. For instance, when Peruer warned the Tsaritsa about Zandik, the Cryo-Archon did not do anything to stop him. Additionally, you have to keep in mind that he was also the one reading out the Pale Star Edict to retrieve the damselette at all costs. This Pale Star Edict is described as the highest of commands, issued directly from the Tsaritsa herself. So, unless Zandik was lying on the name of the Tsaritsa, which, to be fair, is not out of the picture, this guy is certainly not the most devout follower of the Cryo-Archon, but let's assume he is not lying, given we have no reason to doubt him yet. Then what Il Dottore has done so far is likely all part of Piero and the Tsaritsa's plan. Nevertheless, Zandik isn't the first mortal to attempt equaling a descender in might. One of his own colleagues, Sandrone, is almost definitely related to Alain Guillotine and René de Petrichor, possibly herself a creation of Alain. Jacob and René sacrificed their humanity to become saviors, a consistent theme, who could prevent Fontaine's demise. Zandik is similar to René in certain ways, just like how the Narcissus Ordo warned against receiving a vision so as to not become a slave of fate. Zandik directly refused Thoth's gift of a moon wheel when the two met in Sumeru, opting to challenge the throne of heaven through his own will. When it came to Jacob and René, at the end of all their heroic aspirations, built on a bedrock of evil as they were, their sacrifices amounted to nothing but foolish child play of a fairy tale. Nonetheless, there are significant differences between Zandik and the Narcissus Ordo's founders. For one, he is significantly smarter and wiser than either Jacob or René, and unlike René, who attempted to discard his humanity and become a transcendental will for the sake of an altruistic ideal, such as saving mankind, Zandik lacks this lethal weakness of self-righteousness. Although René tried to play the role of a monster, an evil dragon, for the sake of the greater good, his ambitions were still ultimately rooted in his humanity. In the end, he couldn't truly separate himself from it. On the other hand, Zandik is different. Zandik is evil. He has no greater good, and it is incredibly foolish and naive to assume that anyone in Sumeru could have done anything to change him, since being a monster who will stop at nothing to reach his goal is a foundational aspect of what the developers designed his character to represent. Zandik himself even acknowledges this reality on multiple occasions. He has an objective. He knows his objective, and if everyone brands him a heretic and discards of him, then he shall discard of everyone on his path to achieving this objective. No cost too high to pay, no mountain too mighty to climb, no line too far to cross. In the end, if the Abyss is a monster that seeks to consume all that which is not itself, while the Heavenly Principles is a monster that seeks to eradicate all that which is not itself, then the man must become a monster of equal measure himself. For when the heretic finds the true sunlight, who amongst these foolish people confined to their cave as they are will even remain to call him a monster? Thus did the wise man laugh hysterically when the first of the Fatui gave him the most ironic title of a doctor. Now, obviously, I am being somewhat dramatic for the sake of the video. Dottore will almost certainly fail because he is inside a waifu gambling simulator and whoever's his higher-ups are gonna sell their next hot chick one way or another. Hopefully they make his defeat interesting though. For example, it would be cool if the Heavenly Principles decides to intervene and to stop him. But I doubt even that will happen because Phainon is apparently still sleeping somewhere. Inside an egg. An angel's egg. Just kidding, I won't go there. Not today. At any rate, I highly doubt, even if the false god of the new moon is defeated, that it will be the conclusion of Zandik's story, since we still have yet to witness this iconic scene of him gazing upon Irminsul as it burns down in flames. So rest assured, this won't be the last we see of the Doctor. Nordkrai is definitely one of my favorite regions in all of Genshin Impact. Not only are the characters involved really cool, but the story and the lore presented are impeccable. Finally, the developers are starting to tie in the threads found all across their game and reveal the most vital information that we have been waiting for regarding the ancient dragons and the Descenders. I know that I haven't been covering Genshin's recent events sufficiently, but rest assured, I have a bunch of interesting topics in the oven after this one. So, as always, huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for now, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.